What's up, everyone? Sports Talk fans, I have a special guest with us today. 13-time major bowling champion, Jason Belmonte. We're joining in right now with Mr. Jason. Jason, how are you doing, sir?
Good, thanks, mate. How are you doing?
Hey, blessings to have you on. How's it going in Australia, man?
Man, it's going all right. It's going okay.
I hear your accent. so
Yeah, I have an accent. So do you.
definitely, I for sure. South from North Carolina. so as a kid, how did you get involved with bowling? Man, that's an interesting sport in itself.
Yeah, well, I kind of got born into it. So my parents, we live in a really small kind of country town. Um, and in 1980, whatever it was, 84, we had some family from Sydney, which is obviously our biggest city in Australia. And it was raining and it was miserable. And somebody said at the dinner table, "Hey, we should go bowling after this meal." And my parents said, "Well, there isn't one here in town." So the very next day, they decided to investigate in what it would take to put a bowling center in Orange. Now, neither of my parents were bowlers; they'd never bowled before, so this was a pretty crazy idea. But about a year and a half later, the doors. No, sorry, this happened earlier. It happened in 1982, and then a year later, in 1983, because I was born in 1983, the doors opened to the bowling center. So since 1983, my parents have been in the bowling industry, and as a toddler, I would spend my days with my parents while they worked, and they would just give me a ball and a pair of shoes to kind of keep me occupied while they were busy. And that's how I started.
Cool, man. Hey, that's a great story. Hey, did the two-handed form come from that? They teach you that?
No, so because my parents were not bowlers themselves, they weren't coaches. So I developed the two-handed technique because the bowling balls back in 1984 or 5, when I was 18 months old, they were just too heavy for me to use a traditional style. So I would pick this ball up with two hands and kind of, creep towards the line and then just kind of throw it down there. And I was happy because I was bowling and I was, knocking over pins every now and then. But at the end of the day, um, my parents were just happy that I was out of their hair. So I continued to do that style until, well, not until I still do it, but I continued to do that style even though I got older and could hold the ball traditionally, but it just never felt right. It never felt good. So I I didn't do it. I just kept bowling the way that I do.
I hear you, man. Are you the only one on the tour that does that?
Well, no, no, no. I'm definitely not the only one that's on the tour, but there's what, a dozen or so, maybe more than a dozen now. When I first went on tour, there was another guy from Finland, and his name is Osku Palermo. And Osku and I have similar stories. He's the same age as I am. He started roughly the same age as I did. His parents, I think, were managers of a bowling center in Finland, and the ball was too heavy for him as well. So when we first went out on tour, it was just the tour bus, and now, yeah, I would say close to 20 players on the pro tour. Out of what, 160 or so are competitive two-handed players.
Definitely. Hey, you're a trendsetter, man. so Among your 13 major titles, which one was the hardest to win, man?
Oh, that's a really good question. You can answer that a few different ways. I mean, like attaining your first is always difficult because it's a milestone you've yet to achieve. You've never been in that moment where you're holding the trophy before, and obviously the pressure and the nerves to win your first is also incredibly high. But I would probably say the US Open was the trickiest for me because up until I won the US Open in last year, it was the only major championship that I hadn't won. Bowling has 5 major championships. We've got the USBC Masters, we have the World Championship, we have the Tournament of Champions, we have the Players Championship, and the US Open. So I had won the other 4 major championships before, but not the US Open. And I've been close a few times. I've come second, third a couple of times. So it was kind of the one that always got away from me. And then last year, I had a chance again to win and was able to roll the strike and the spare and the 10th frame to win. So that was something that had been eluding my career for a really, really long time. And it was also the one I really, really wanted more than the most. And I think that's probably why it was the trickiest.
On the perfect game, that 300, how hard is it to keep your focus when those things are going on, man?
Yeah, I mean it's all about your mental state, to be honest. I mean, if things are going great during the tournament and your focus is just laser point and you've just got everything kind of running on like a replay, like you've just pressed play on your day and you can just kind of enjoy it. Those 300 game moments are easier, but the ones that are really tricky are, when it hasn't been going great, you've found a way to make it start going great, but you need this 300 game to qualify for the next round or, to qualify for the television show. And then all of a sudden, it's not just the 300 anymore. The prize is the extension of your life in the event, or it's the major prize money that you're going to potentially win because of that. And then that pressure mounts. So you have not just achieving perfection, but you also have the rewards that are going to come with it at that moment. And that can be really, really tricky to handle.
Definitely. That leads us to the next question. That matches against Pete Weber. How do you handle someone screaming on the other lane, man? He's known for yelling. I've seen growing up. I've on ESPN Classic. Your matches were on, and him on the opposing lane screaming after a good strike. How do you handle that, man?
Yeah, mate, you don't pay attention to it. You can either watch the show and enjoy the show, or you can just ignore it. And I've done both with Pete. I've sat there and watched him and just marveled at the show that he puts on. And then there are other times where I'm just so focused on what I'm doing, I'm not too interested in his show. So I don't know, I guess for me, it depends on the score. if I'm heavily winning or heavily losing, I'll watch the show. And if it's neck and neck and I really need to make the next few shots clutch, I completely block him out.
So this leads to the next one. Who's been the toughest opponent for you?
I would say in the last, between 5-6 years, there's probably 2 players in particular that have stood out. The first is a gentleman by the name of EJ Tackett. And he is and has been for the last half a decade or so, someone who I've met on television probably more than anyone else. And it just seems that every single time I feel like I'm running away with the tournament, I look over my shoulder and EJ is right behind me. Or if I feel like I'm bowling fantastic and I think I'm on top, I look at the leaderboard and EJ's in front of me. So It's been a really fun battle with EJ because every time you play against him, he wants to beat you so badly that he gives you everything every time. So it's always an entertaining match. The other player is probably the successor of me as the two-handed, the throne of the two-handed style, and his name is Anthony Simonson. He's a very young kid. He went out on tour when he was 16 years old. So he's been out there. He's 23 now. So he's coming up to a decade on tour, and he's still, in his early 20s. And, what he's capable of doing with the bowling ball is nothing short of awesome to watch. So I would probably say those two players are the hardest people that I've had to play in my career.
Definitely. So when you look at the sport of bowling, who's on the Mount Rushmore, man? Greatest of all time, top 5.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are still some players that have the ability to jockey their position up, right? Because they're still competing. So statistically, they could, at the end of their career, join Mount Rushmore. But if we were to say right now, bowling stops. No one's allowed to ever bowl a ball ever again. Who are my top 5? I would probably say Walter Ray Williams Jr., Earl Anthony, Pete Weber, Norm Duke, and then I would, if I may be so bold to say that their faces would be fully carved out, and the guys would just start working on mine. They're just starting to cut the nose out, right? And I would hope by the end of my career that we'll have fully formed my face on that mountain. But that's my goal. My goal is to be, to be widely considered, one of the best that's ever thrown a ball down the lane. So I hope to continue to roll these strikes so I can achieve that dream.
Definitely. How much longer are you going to keep bowling, man? I read some reports about you going back to Australia.
Yeah, well, I had to go back to Australia just because of the pandemic. And it's been tricky to leave, obviously, because of the pandemic. But I'm 38 now, and you can be bowling into your mid-50s competitively on the Pro Tour. Obviously, you're probably not as competitive in your mid-50s as you are in your 30s or 20s, but I hope that I'm still able to compete, maybe not as a full-time PBA player, but definitely part-time, maybe focusing just on the major championships, or if there's a specific venue that I really enjoy going to, maybe catching a plane and going to that specific event. But I would like to think that, if my legs are still working, my arms are still working, I'll still be bowling.
Definitely. So I'll lead you on this. The lessons that you've learned through that bowling experience, how have you applied those things to your personal life, man?
Yeah, I think there's a lot you can take out of sport into your personal life. Bowling is an individual sport. So there are different lessons as an individual as there are competing in teams, but there is a team element to bowling sometimes. And I think probably the biggest lesson that you can learn is just about never giving up, whether it be in sport, whether it be in life. I think as soon as you cloak yourself in a defeatist attitude, I think that's when the wheels come off quickly and you start falling down the hill. No matter how tough it is, I always feel like you're only given what you can handle. So you've just got to keep persisting. You got to keep striving. You can never quit, never give up, and you'll one day look back at the road that you've created, and there'll be different checkpoints along the way, which could have been the end if you didn't have the persistence and drive to continue through. And you look back and go, I'm really glad I went through that wall, and really glad I hopped over that river, and I'm really glad I climbed that mountain, because where I am today is where I want to be.
Definitely. Jason, it's been a blessing to have you on our show, Sports Talk 1996, man. And this concludes our interview.
No worries at all. I really appreciate it. Cheers. Have a good one, mate.
You do the same.